Alex Ansary here for July 9th, 2019. So the study that came out in recent months validates at least a decade of commentary that I've given on the geomagnetic connection to changes in human perception, human behavior. There's a lot of information that we can glean from this. So I am going to go over that now. Let's take a look first, however, at this video, which comes to us from the CalTech YouTube channel. Yeah, I mean, it's only 27 seconds. There's no audio. So this is some of the information that they've put out. And what I'm about to do, and I'm going to try to go over this slowly. I'm going to go over the information that they shared. And from this information, we may have, for the first time, a possible, more than likely, scientific explanation to the specific physical process. How can this be? Many people want to know, how can this be? How can this be possible? How changes in the sun can affect our consciousness. Some people may have a spiritual experience. Some people may have a different experience. So I believe in talking about the shifts in consciousness from the high to the low, we've got to be honest about where people are at, right? So these are some pictures. This one, for example, that come from the CalTech study. So this was done in conjunction with the University of Tokyo, and they have confirmed that human consciousness can measurably detect changes in the magnetic field. This is not the first study on the correlations, but it's more scientific, and that it's looking at the physiological changes in real time. Now, this study was featured at spaceweather.com, which typically doesn't post fringe views on the solar influence, meaning that this is a positive sign that the world is catching up, and fortunately in time for the dawn of solar cycle 25, because even though we're in a solar minimum, if you take a look right now at spaceweather.com, they're seeing signs of a new magnetic polarity. So even though it's a minimum, there will still be signs of change from one cycle, one solar cycle to the next. It's noted by a change in the magnetic polarity. I want to note really briefly before I continue reading on the slides. There is what looks to be an excerpt from a government document that is in relation to the CIA study on when their remote viewing experiments in the 1970s under Stargate were believed to be most effective. And they found that when the sun is quiet to a certain degree, that there is an enhanced level of ESP, or demonstrable accuracy, in remote viewing programs. Now, we will discuss elements of that declassified 800-page report in the future. And if there's a volunteer out there, someone that wants to dig into that and bring up the bullet points, well, that's something that needs to be done. So in this latest study, the scientists built an isolated radio frequency shielded chamber. And what they had done is participants sitting in silence and darkness for an hour. During that time, they shifted the magnetic field silently around the chamber, and they measured brain waves via electrodes that were positioned at 64 locations on their heads. 34 people of various ethnicities were involved in the study. Consciously, nothing changed for them as they sat in the dark. However, changes in brain waves were detected as the magnetic field shifted around them. The researchers tracked the alpha rhythm in the brain, which occurs between 8 and 13 hertz. When the brain is engaged, the alpha power is high. When something captures its attention, consciously or unconsciously, it drops. Sensory stimulation also drops the amplitude of brain waves. So I'm going to try not to go too fast through this, but I work to try to word this to keep this very simple and factually based on the study. And then we can talk about the study and how it has greater implications. Okay, so let me go over that again. Sensory stimulation also dropped the amplitude of brain waves. Brain activity dropped, in other words. The experience showed a drop of 60% over several hundred milliseconds, followed by a recovery to baseline after a few seconds. The test also showed that the brain appeared to be actively processing magnetic information and rejecting signals that are not natural. This has been referred to as a whole new sense beyond the sixth, and this is something you can Google. They call it Magnetor Reception. And the full paper for the study is titled Transduction of the Geomagnetic Field as Evidenced from Alpha Band Activity in the Human Brain. Now, how can this be possible? So it was discovered back in the 1960s that migratory animals use the Earth's magnetic field for travel due to a little-known substance called magnetite, tiny magnetic particles found in the brain. In 1992, a professor at the California Institute of Technology, Joseph Kirschwink, was featured in the New York Times for his claim to have discovered magnetite in human brain cells. His work was rejected by 3 leading research journals. You know, I bring that up because a lot of people ask if something has been peer-reviewed. And see, the consensus reality may dominate the peer review process to a certain degree. So just because some papers were rejected, right, years ago, here we are, for example, in the year 2019, seeing how relevant some of these studies actually are. If other animals are affected, how can humans be affected? What we know about magnetite is that it can act as a transducer, linking ambient electromagnetic activity to cellular function. Magnetite has been found in the pineal gland, where it's believed that there's a concentration of it. Magnetite has also been identified as the substance in which migratory animals are able to travel via the Earth's magnetic field. Magnetite may also provide a basis for magnetic broadcasting of our brain's information. So this discovery further indicates that we are both transmitters and receivers of subtle energy and consciousness. The pineal gland regulates circadian rhythm as well as melatonin production and is sensitive to magnetic fields. So there's a lot more information to get into regarding melatonin and how it responds to light. The image that you're seeing right now is from the early study involving Michael Pessinger. The government studies on the accuracies of their remote viewing program in proximity to geomagnetic activity. And there was a ton of studies that were done in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. Then things got really quiet. Then in our world, things got really weird. So the next major scientific study that we're going to highlight was initially published in New Scientist in 2008. We're moving on from one key study to another key study. Okay, so we just covered CalTech and the University of Tokyo, right? But 11 years ago, this was the headline in New Scientist. Quote, does the Earth's magnetic field cause suicides? And so I'm going to read you the key information from that. Oleg Shumilov of the Institute of North Industrial Ecology Problems in Russia found a peak in suicides in a northern Russian city during peaks in geomagnetic activity. He studied activity from 1948 to 1997. And he grouped it into 3 seasonal peaks each year, one from March to May, another in July, the last in October. Additionally, new moons have been linked to suicides, by the way, in a 2000 BBC study that found that suicide rates increased as winter turned to spring and summer to autumn. The Finnish National Public Health Institute studied 1,400 suicides, and found a link to changes of seasons. But I believe that if they looked even deeper at things beyond the moon, their study would have found more information. That's the key link right there. Light changes, changes in seasons. A 2006 Australian study also found a correlation between peaks in suicide numbers and geomagnetic activity. South Africa has also collected data on suicides and magnetic storms. A British study in 1994 suggested a 36% increase in the number of men admitted into hospital for depression in the second week after geomagnetic storms. Let me pause right there. So I've discussed the statements of others that have looked into the solar effect over human consciousness, people like Burl Payne. The slides give the cliff notes. I have made those slides available for free over at solarmaxnews.com and otbtv.net just to bring people up to speed with some of the basics. And Burl Payne has found from looking at the work of Alexander Chizevsky and the war cycles of war and peace that go back hundreds of years, thousands of years even. They looked at 2,500 years of data using Chinese sunspot counts that go back that far. In the West, it only goes back to the 1600s. And so the general idea that Mr. Payne has been sharing is that major wars break out on the ascent or descent of the solar cycle. So there's a reason, a scientifically based reason, based in pattern recognition, why you hear me talk about the early 2020s on the ascent up to the peak of sunspot cycle 25, which they have predicted in recent months, recent weeks, actually. They have pinpointed what year? 2025. You've heard this year before, right here on this YouTube channel, as the random slideshow brings up the slide right on cue. The synchronicity of the random slides, not in order, is kind of what makes this current style of delivery exciting in a world of recycled dramas and headlines. It's a new direction, and it's a powerful new direction, for we are in a new cycle. Kelly Posner with Columbia University is quoted in the New Scientist report that we're going over now, right? Suggesting that the answer to the riddle as to what goes on, what is going on with the actual physical changes, the word is desynchronization, specifically of the circadian rhythm and melatonin production. Now I'm going to pause right there. Many humans alive today that are not grounded and balanced cannot deal with such desynchronization. Where you hear me talk about the disharmonic frequencies and energies and technologies mixing in with what's natural, what should be good, what is our friend. Nature is healing. The natural cycle, that's what we want to synchronize with. These other technologies are throwing off melatonin production. So I'm giving my speculation and my opinion during a time, a very serious time in our nation where more people are flipping out. Look at where we are in the cycle. And look at where we're going. Going back to the report, geomagnetic storms disrupt body clocks, precipitating seasonal affective disorders, and therefore increasing suicide risk. Shumilov did not believe that geomagnetic activity influences everyone equally. He also presented hospital data showing a correlation between abnormal baby heart rates and periods of high geomagnetic activity. So there's something else that I can recall before we go to the next study. So they've looked at babies that have been born during periods of high solar activity. Right? And they found particular anomalies and risks. I think there could also be some gifts as well from being born a little bit different. You know, I myself, I'm not a very functional person. I'm not. in mainstream America. I think most of you understand that. And that I'm an outside-the-box thinker who vibes to something else. But why is that really? I was born in 1980 during a period of peak solar activity. Is it totally by accident that this is my number one topic at present, and something that actually has the ability to bring a smile to my face from knowing that my content is reaching some of you, and it's a more healing experience for us to talk about something that we all may have an interest in a world where there's so many things that are getting people to fight each other. And I don't support that. And I don't support the things that people are doing to each other. And there's a part of me that is not happy when I look at the city in which I was born and the unrest that's taking place there, the focus on that city. To talk about Portland in conjunction with these changes, we can see how a number of people, regardless of political affiliation, can be affected by these major celestial changes, more in some places than others. Okay, I'm gonna pull it back here because I feel for the people that are affected by this unrest. And what people need to understand, we're going to talk about this in another essay. The powers that be understand how we are impacted by the solar cycles, and they use it against us. The sooner we start to figure out the formula and start to see the patterns for ourselves, the sooner people on the independent level evolve spiritually to the next level. Because I'm not here promoting certain religions nor attacking. Rather, I'm adding an additional insight into these causal factors, as above, so below. So if we can come to a certain level of awareness, again, we look at the study before us in the random slides that come up, the government has been looking at the telepathic connection to the changes in the sun. When the sun changes and it affects the field, there's certain periods in which mankind is more tapped in to the truth. Could there be a reason why the powers that be would want to have this information, as well as learning how to affect the field, thus affecting human consciousness? So now let's move forward, because the following headline comes to us from Reuters. And the purpose of that is to show that even in the mainstream, Reuters in August 2011 has discussed this. Riots, wild markets, did space storms drive us mad? Just check out the first paragraph. This mainstream report leads with a statement that, quote, some academics have claimed that such geomagnetic storms can affect humans, altering moods and leading people into negative behavior during effects on their biochemistry. They also cite evidence for hospital admission for depression and suicides increasing. Here is a citation from the Federal Reserve. Or actually, this is a specific quote from the article. A 2003 study by the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta found that such storms could affect the stock market as traders were more likely to make pessimistic choices. Unusually high levels of geomagnetic activity has a negative, statistically and economically significant effect on the following week's stock returns for all U.S. stock market indexes, or indices, the authors found in their report. Okay? The Reuters author concludes, quote, it could, of course, be mere coincidence that this has been a roller coaster week on the markets and that Britain was rocked by a wave of ferocious riots and looting. Think back to 2011. I'm sure there's more than a few people in the audience that remember seeing riots in 2011 on TV in the UK. If not, check it out on YouTube. But there was some crazy stuff that went down then. Going back to the report, but market watchers take comfort from the fact that the space weather forecast for Friday has gone quiet. So right there we have humor. Market watchers can take comfort because the space weather forecast has gone quiet. So as I was getting ready for the Coast to Coast discussion, it would be then that I would see a specific video by the name of No More Secrets And I don't want to put too much on my plate at once, right? But there's a lot of information that I wrote during those periods, those weeks in which I wasn't doing any YouTube videos. I wasn't sitting on my hands watching Netflix. I was writing. I was focusing my efforts. And sometimes I have to pull completely away from tubing. Not necessarily just talking about tubing down the river, but doing video and producing videos. I mean, sometimes, folks, it's necessary to write a mini book by just doing that and nothing but that. And that's what I did. And so I'm going to come back with more information on additional studies. Look into Michael Pessinger or Pessinger. Michael, Persinger. His video is No More Secrets. And apparently the government gauged the effectiveness of its remote viewing program in a large number of studies from 1974 to 1988, either involving Michael, but at the very least citing Michael. I think it's on page 72 in this 800-page document that they declassified, that hundreds, you can mark my words on this one, there are very few places out there where there are hundreds of scientific studies on the scanning of the human brain, or the EEG, with response or with regards to magnetic changes. So basically controlled studies in some sort of a controlled environment like a lab, just like you're seeing these pictures from CalTech, right? There's evidence to indicate and suggest that the government's been involved in the study for a long, long time. So there is additional information in a video out there called No More Secrets. And here is this individual, Michael Pessinger, who's talking about all of these. Now think about this in the rise of 5G. He's talking about the potential of all these humans being linked up, or from his scientific research, the reality of that. And it seems like his role was to release a lot of information. He passed last year in 2018. His work seems to be the most detailed, getting into the paranormal, geomagnetic correlations, with a specific focus on EEG results. You can find the 800-page plus study by Googling the CIA studied the impact of space storms on psychic powers. The specific paper released is entitled Geomagnetic Factors in Subjective Telepathic Precognitive and Post-Mortem Experiences. Now, with regards to the movie, we might as well kind of conclude on somewhat of a lighter note. The entertaining movie by the name of The Man Who Stared at Goats, starring George Clooney. I think that's funny. There's clearly a bit of truth mixed in with the world of fiction. There are elements of that program that apparently did take place. But the reality is, experimentation studies have gone on for a long, long time. We don't necessarily know the results of those studies. Ultimately, we are linked consciously, and so major disturbances to the Earth's magnetic field can cause potentially major disturbances to the collective human population. But isn't that the agenda? Isn't this a more advanced understanding of mind control that's a little more specific and almost scientific? When we actually start to look at specific periods in which events are manufactured down on the ground in order to whip the masses up into a violent frenzy, problem, reaction, solution, but a scientific formula that they're following to bring that through, that most humans are totally unaware of. We will conclude by looking at solar revolution yet again for a little bit of hope as we talk about the potential of these magnetic fields altering human consciousness. Because this is deeper than looking at the conspiratorial side of things when we look at the potential for an evolutionary leap. Reading now from page 59. This hypothesis holds that increasingly strong geomagnetic disturbances will result in the emergence of a new species. This will involve a process of ascension for humankind that will at first be governed by extremely powerful solar flares and the chain reactions provoked by them. In my view, this is a scientifically sound hypothesis from every standpoint. But now let's see what other scientists have to say about the subject. He talks about a number of professors and other scientists reaching the conclusion that electromagnetic fields have played a decisive role in evolution. This concept is supported by the fact that in living creatures, all electrical regulation and control mechanisms occur at the counterpart electromagnetic field frequencies, embedded in a homogeneous space comprising various force fields that act as a static wave. We can be privy to cosmic processes provided that we understand their workings and are able to respond adequately to changes in them. This holds true as well for the electrostatic fields that form between the ionosphere and the Earth's surface, and that, as previously mentioned, discharge in the form of lightning. In view of the fact that these fields, like their geomagnetic counterparts, are affected by solar flares and have a massive effect, they are worth a second look because their effective power is also enormous. That is from Solar Revolution, the book, and we will be back with more. I'm Alex Ansary signing off.